and welcome to the State Memorial Service for the Honourable Jane Garrett. My name is Mark Jepp, and I was a parliamentary colleague and friend of Jane's, and I've been very honoured by the family who have invited me to be the Master of Ceremonies for today's event. Today's State Memorial is being held on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I wish to acknowledge them as traditional owners. I'd also like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and any Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today. Can I also acknowledge, most importantly, Jane and James' children, Molly, Sasha and Max, James, of course, Jane's father Graham, her sister Catherine, and the extended Higgins and Garrett families. I would also like to acknowledge Colonel Mark Richards, representing the Governor-General, Mark Dreyfus, Attorney-General, representing the Prime Minister, Her Excellency, the Honourable Linda Dessau, Governor of Victoria, and Mr Anthony Howard, the Honourable Daniel Andrews, Premier of Victoria, the Honourable Matthew Guy, Leader of the Opposition, Federal and Cabinet Ministers, the Honourable Nazir Al-Asma, President of the Legislative Council, the Honourable Marie Edwards, Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, former Premiers, the Honourable John Brumby and Dr Rosemary McKenzie, the Honourable Steve Bracks and Terry Bracks, the Honourable Jeff Kennett, current and former Members of Parliament, and of course, friends and colleagues of Jane. To begin, could I ask you, if you're able to, please be upstanding for the singing of the Australian National Anthem to be performed by Ms Nina Farrow.
Australians, all let us rejoice, for we are one and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil. Our home is girt by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains then let us sing. Advance Australia fair.
Thank you, Nina, for that lovely rendition of the National Anthem. Well, friends, we gather here today to celebrate the life of one of Victoria's most respected daughters, Jane Furneaux Garrett. And it's fitting that we do so at the Brunswick Town Hall, in a neighbourhood that has proudly been the stomping ground of the Garrett family for many, many years. Jane was born on the 16th of March 1973, and she died after a long battle with breast cancer at the ridiculously young age of 49 on the 2nd of July 2022. Hers was a deeply private battle, which made her loss so much more shocking and devastating to us all. But it's not the dates of her life and death that are important today. As the poet Linda Ellis said, it's the dash in between that matters. She said, for that dash represents all the time they spent alive on earth. And now only those who loved them know what that little line is worth. What matters is how we lived and loved, and how we spent our dash. Jane's family held a private funeral for her in July, and the Victorian Parliament formally paid its respects to Jane last month. But today is an opportunity for so many others whose lives she touched to express your own grief and sadness, but to also celebrate the magnificent legacy that Jane leaves behind, and the far too short but remarkable life that she lived. I know that if she was here today, in that very high-pitched, infectious twang of hers, she'd be saying, mate, just focus on the dash. And so today we will hear tributes and reflections about the force of nature that was Jane Garrett. And yes, Jane, my dear friend, it will be all about that dash. It will be about your dash. The early years. Well, mention Jane's name to anybody and immediately some common themes emerge. Her exceptional intellect, her strength, her courage, her integrity, and the values of fairness and equality that guided her in life. Where did it all come from? It will surprise no one that Jane excelled academically at Penley and Essendon Grammar and Radford College in Canberra. School was a happy place for Jane. She saw it as an opportunity to learn, and I'm reliably informed by the family, she didn't mind the social aspects of school either. Jane met every academic task and challenge given to her in school with gusto and determination, and she was excited to continue her education journey at Australian National University, where she studied arts and law. She rounded out her time at Radford and ANU by participating in drama and debating, two skills that I think you will agree came in very handy for her during her later professional life. Of course, she didn't stay away from student politics, nor could she resist from making her contribution to the student newspaper. I can't, unfortunately, mention any of the social aspects of Jane's life at uni, but I can say that we did hear some at her private funeral a couple of months ago, and if you happen to bump into her girlfriend Catherine from those days, gee, she's got some very good stories to tell. I really don't know where Jane found the time to attain 2 degrees, to be frank. Jane's sense of fairness and equality was also developing during these years, and it was commonplace for her mother Pam, a public high school teacher and social activist, and her father Graham, a Baptist minister and theologian, to engage in lively discussions at the kitchen table on all manner of serious social issues. Nothing was off limits, including nuclear disarmament, world peace, unions in the workplace, equality for women and funding for public education, just to name a few. It was commonplace in the Garrett household to have an array of guests engaging enthusiastically about these big issues, and Jane's parents encouraged her involvement in those discussions from an early age. And this involvement often extended to her participation in public demonstrations, and I'm sure that many of us here today walked arm in arm with Jane down many streets of Melbourne. I referred in my opening to Jane as a force of nature, and I just want to underline that. Consider what Jane achieved after finishing university at the end of 1996, between the years 1997 and 2010. In 1997, she became an associate to Justin Allen Bolton of the AIRC. In 1998, an article clerk with law firm Holding and Redlich. In 1999, she was an employee with the Transport Workers Union. In 2000 to 2004, she was a senior advisor to Premier Steve Bracks, coming out of the Attorney General's office, Rob Hulls. In 2004 to 2010, she was the Industrial Relations and Discrimination Lawyer for Slater and Gordon. In 2008, I haven't finished yet, in 2008 she was elected to the Yarra Council. In 2010, she was elected Mayor of the Yarra Council. In 2010, she was also pre-selected for the state seat of Brunswick, and she won that seat. If that wasn't enough during that time frame, she also found time to marry James and also bring Molly and Sasha into the world as well. I feel tired just thinking about it. Somebody who knew her very, very well from those years and was so impressed by her, he brought her into his private office when he won office at the end of 1999. Would you please welcome former Premier, the Honourable Steve Bracks, to the stage to share his tribute to Jane Garrett. Premier Bracks.
Thanks very much, Mark. Could I also acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation whose land we are gathered, representatives of the Governor-General and Prime Minister, the Governor of Victoria, the Honourable Linda Dessau and Anthony Howard, the Premier, the Honourable Daniel Andrews, Ministers and Members of the Victorian Parliament, Ministers and Members of the Federal Parliament, former Premiers of Victoria and their partners, Jane's many, many friends here this morning, and most importantly, Jane's family, Molly, Sasha, Max and James. Her father Graham, sister Catherine and the extended Garrett and Higgins family. On behalf of everyone here, I want to acknowledge your pain and heartbreak at the losing of Jane. Friends, Jane knew how to live. She knew every moment mattered. Well before her breast cancer diagnosis, she knew life is precious and precarious. Jane knew the secret of a good life. Jane knew the secret to meaningful, profound life is to grasp every opportunity to make the world a better place. Jane made that her life's goal. Her parents helped forge that goal. Her mother Pam, lost to the scourge of cancer in 2009, was a passionate English teacher who worked in public education her entire career. Her father Graham is a retired theologian. In her first parliamentary speech, Jane described how she and her sister Catherine grew up in a home teeming with visitors, where our parents held social justice group meetings every fortnight, and we were regulars on the public demonstration circuit. Jane lived her life true to the values Pam and Graham cultivated in their vibrant inner city home. I met Jane 22 years ago in my first year as Premier of Victoria back in the year 2000. I recall Tim Pallas, who was then my Chief of Staff, telling me he had a problem. Rob Hulls, the then Attorney General, was on the warpath. Hulsey on the warpath was not unusual, but Tim's concern about it was. Tim explained that he had offered a brilliant young lawyer who worked in Rob's office a job in my office. So I said, "What's the problem?" "Hulsey is furious," Tim said. "He said she is the smartest, most politically savvy Labor lawyer he's come across and he needs her in his office." Jane joined my office. I'm not sure if Rob has forgiven me. I know he hasn't forgiven Tim. Jane took on the responsibilities for the Justice portfolio. We were a first-term minority government. Jane thrived in that pressure cooker environment. She soon proved that her legal skills paled in comparison to her political skills. She could talk to anyone with a confidence in authorities that belied her age. I saw Jane go head-to-head with department secretaries, union officials and ministers, always with respect and always with resolve. Jane worked with me to restore the powers and independence of the most important democratic officers in the state, the DPP and the Auditor-General. Jane helped us get extra police in the streets, build new police stations and ensure our police force was equipped with state-of-the-art safety equipment. Jane was there for our landslide victory in 2002. I had to leave the party early to prepare for day one of term 2. I'm reliably informed that Jane was the last to leave the dance floor that night. In our second term, Jane helped deliver fixed 4-year terms for the Victorian Parliament, an increase in funding for legal aid and measures to modernise the courts and ensure judicial sentencing discretion and independence. It was while working in my office that Jane met James, which led to her greatest joy, her 3 beautiful children, Molly, Sasha and Max. You don't need me to tell you your mum was amazing. A brilliant mind, principled, compassionate, courageous, and she had the best sense of humour and the best laugh. I could often hear Jane's laugh in my office way down the corridor. I wasn't surprised when Jane left my office in 2004 to pursue a legal career, nor was I surprised when she was elected to the Victorian Parliament as a member for Brunswick. There was a certain inevitability to her political progression from advisor to backbencher to parliamentary secretary to minister. She lived and breathed politics. The last few years were incredibly difficult for Jane and everyone who loved her. Her cancer diagnosis and its cruel return were heartbreaking. But Jane, determined to carry on, to keep making every minute matter. She lived with conviction and passion. And she lives on in the social justice reforms she helped deliver for Victoria. And most importantly, she lives on in Molly, Sasha and Max. Jane Garrett lived a meaningful, profound life. She left this life way too early, but she left knowing that she made the world a better place.
Thank you, Steve, for that beautiful tribute to Jane. Well, as Premier Bracks has touched on, it was pretty evident early on that the Labor Party had a prodigious political talent on their hands. In fact, I was recently talking to the member for Richmond and former Government Minister Richard Wynne about Jane's political abilities. And to paraphrase that conversation, and maybe to clean it up a little bit, he said, it's why we just had to get her into Spring Street, and we had to do so before those bloody feds realised how good she was. And she was good. She was so good that in 2012, despite all of the things that I talked about, her previous achievements and now being in Parliament, she took time to have Max in 2012, and shortly thereafter was appointed by the then opposition leader, soon to become Premier, Dan Andrews, to the shadow cabinet. When the Andrews Labor government was formed in 2014, the Premier wasted no time promoting Jane into the cabinet as Minister for Emergency Services, Minister for Consumer Affairs and Liquor and Gaming. Jane was also the Parliamentary Secretary for Jobs, working very, very closely with her dear friend, Minister Jarla Pulford. It's great to see so many of Jane's former ministerial staff here today. Also here today to share her thoughts and her tribute to Jane is her very, very dear friend from those days in the Victorian Parliament, the former member for Wendouree, Sharon Knight. Please welcome Sharon to the stage.
Being friends with Jane was really something. If you were lucky enough to be loved by Jane, then you were very lucky indeed. Jane had this way of getting you to do things, and later you would think, how did she do that? She also really valued your opinion. I wish I had $1 for every time I heard her say, "So, Shaz, what do you think?" I first met Jane the day after the 2010 election at, wait for it, a faction meeting, surprise. We had both won our seats, she Brunswick, me Ballarat West. She was standing on the street, phone in hand of course. We introduced ourselves and that was it. We hit Parliament with other newcomers, Bronwyn Halfpenny, Lee Talamis, Natalie Hutchins, Anthony Carbines, and the absolutely fabulous Marie Edwards, the class of 2010. Jane, Marie and I shared an office for a while. A lot of the time we didn't know where Jane was. I'd say to Marie, "Have you seen Jane today?" And she'd say, "No, have you?" And of course Jane would be off giving one of her amazing contributions in Parliament, or having coffee with someone, or she'd be walking to the office and she'd bump into someone and get distracted by that. Or she would be on her phone, the phone would ring and then she'd go, or she'd be meeting with a constituent or stakeholder or any number of things. Her days were always full. But eventually, at the end of the day, she'd burst into the office. We would hear her before we saw her and say, "So, how are you? It must be time for a drink. What do you think?" And off we'd go. Marie, in her beautiful condolence contribution, spoke about how Marie and I would change lyrics to songs and perform them for colleagues who I'm sure were really thrilled by that, particularly the Premier. I know you couldn't wait for us to do one of our renditions. For my 50th birthday, Marie wrote a song and roped in Anthony Carbines and Jane to be the backup singers. Well, during the rehearsal, Marie realised just how bad a singer Jane really was. Not that Jane thought so. Anyway, on the night, it is fair to say that what Jane lacked in carrying a tune, she more than made up for in enthusiasm. And no microphone required. Jane, being the great friend that she is, took it upon herself to end my single life. And like everything she tackled, she approached that task with gusto. Look, there were a few disasters initially before she absolutely nailed it and introduced me to Mark O'Brien. It was the best idea Jane had ever had. Jane, of course, was the best woman at our wedding, and she grasped that role with both hands, along with a lot of our wedding guests. She grabbed them and was saying, "Isn't this great?" And they had to agree with her whether they did or not. I'll never forget the absolute joy on her face on that day. And once again, she was the life of the party. So then there were four, Mark and I, and James and Jane. So many wonderful memories of New Year's Eves, bad singing, quite a bit of drinking, dinners, holidays, so much laughter, so many words spoken, so many memories to cherish. From the moment that Mark and I became an item, we talked to Jane every day, at least once a day. If she called Mark, he didn't ever need to put it on speakerphone. I could hear every word she said clearly. She was always so interested in our kids, what they were doing, how they were going, who they were seeing, and had an opinion on all of those things. And Mark and I, well, we just love Molly, Sasha and Max. And we love hearing about your goals and your dreams. And yes, even the naughty things that you did. I won't tell. I probably will. Our working lives changed, but our friendship remained. We always stood by each other and supported each other through some very trying times, both professionally and personally. Jane always stayed upright, even when she wanted to fall. She always stayed fearsome, even when she was consumed by fear. And she always stayed the best, funniest, loudest, strongest, feisty, and loyal friend you could ever have. Jane and I disagreed on one thing. She believed there was some place that we go to when we leave this earth. I don't. But on this occasion, and only this occasion, I really hope that she's right and I'm wrong, because I would give anything to see her again and hear her say, as she showed me around, "So, Shaz, what do you think?" Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon, for that beautiful and heartfelt tribute. We've now got a very special treat. We've heard all about Jane's love of music, and I can attest to that, and her bad singing. We're now going to hear from a very dear friend of Jane's, Mr. Tim Rogers. Tim first met Jane's sister Catherine at law school in Canberra, where they became best friends, which is how Tim first met Jane as a Year 6 student. I think she was 14, Tim was telling me before the start of the event. And through the friendship with Karen, Tim forged a strong connection to the Garrett family and in particular Jane. Please welcome Tim.
Thank you. Yes, I met Janie when, I guess she would have been 14, when Catherine and Cameron, were being rat bags at ANU, and Thank you to Mr. and Mrs. Garrett for not throwing us out of the house. But even at 14, meeting Jane behind that million megawatt smile, I had an inkling that she was someone to be watched forever, to be respected, and never to be crossed. I've been watching so much TV, I'm thinner than I should be. I'm like a waterlogged ball, just no one wants to kick around anymore. I've gotten all them morning hairdo, oh, that no comb can get through. It's all granola and beer and a calling card and a silk cut souvenir. I miss you like sleep. There's nothing romantic about the hours I keep, but it's the mornings when it starts. Just don't dress so sharp. Now got a heavy heart. Talk a lot about football. Girls are kissed in grade 4. Pee off my friends, now I'm just digging a hole, just staring at the floor. Every t-shirt's got a wine stain. I'm loving cigarettes again, and I know every tune about those guys and girls and hurts and hearts and moons. I miss you like sleep. There's nothing romantic about the hours I keep, but it's the mornings when it starts. Just don't feel that sharp. Now got a heavy heart. Oh, it's just a low rent paying, palpitating, just a pulp inside my shirt. But there's a weight that's hanging so hard. Oh, you know it hurts. Oh, it hurts. Ooh, ooh. Oh, I've been watching so much TV, a little thinner than I should be. I'm like a waterlogged ball that just no one wants to kick round anymore. I miss you like sleep. There's nothing romantic about the hours I keep, but it's the mornings when it starts. Oh, my heavy heart.
Thank you, Tim. That was beautiful. That was beautiful. Well, Jane was many things, as we've heard today. She was very much a proud trade unionist. She believed deeply in the collective, mentoring many young women in particular through the union movement. She and James were well known to all players in the union movement for a very, very long period of time. And Jane loved nothing more than a union march and spending time with her fellow trade unionists. And of course, she came from a long lineage of working people and understood that workers acting collectively were far more powerful than any one person. Jane has many, many friends in the union movement, and one of those friends, former State Secretary for the RTBU, Luba Grigorovich, joins us today to share her tribute to Jane. Immediately after Luba's contribution, we'll have a photo montage on the screens that will also be accompanied by a musical tribute. Please welcome Luba.
Thank you, Mark. I begin today by acknowledging the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people, the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today. And I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. I would like to thank Jane's family, James, Max, Molly, Sasha, Graham, and of course Catherine, for asking me to share a few words today about Jane. Jane Garrett was my friend, and it's obvious to me, looking at so many people in this room, that room, and the other room, that many of us shared that privilege. We were all touched by her special brand of star power and her big-hearted love. I knew of Jane well before she knew who I was. Through sheer luck, I was assigned in the 2010 state election campaign to help volunteer in the marginal seat of Brunswick, the electorate which we're in today. Jane's reputation preceded her. Irrespective of who I met, whether it was the sisters at Emily's List or the local ALP branch members, anyone, they all told me the same thing. You will love Jane. She's young, she's smart as a whip, she's energetic, she's a hard worker, she's full of life, and she's a lot of fun. And I've got to say, that she was. Her campaign office was always buzzing. She would welcome new and old volunteers like they were long-lost friends. The fridge was always full, a mountain of snacks to feed the hordes of campaigners who flocked to help get Jane elected. From day one of stepping into the campaign office, Jane had this ability to instantly make you feel as though you were part of the family. But it was obvious that Jane was not your typical candidate. Jane was a rock star, an incredibly energetic super campaigner, Labor's secret weapon in Brunswick, which was a seat becoming more and more difficult to hold. Jane loved bringing people together and encouraging friendships to blossom. She was incredibly inclusive and generous. She wanted people to have fun, and she always saw the best in people. And I was a little starstruck. Although Jane never acted like a rock star. She wasn't aloof or elitist. She certainly was never hard to reach. She was so approachable and reached out to her young volunteers like a mama bird, encouraging them all. There's many young women in this room who have been nurtured by Jane. I was very lucky to have been one of them. She took me under her wing, but she also encouraged me to fly on my own too. Jane changed the course of my life by so generously giving me her time and her wisdom. She supported my development in the trade union movement and gave me the courage to lead when others thought I was too young. She introduced me to mighty leaders of respected unions from around the country. Jane did believe deeply in the trade union movement. In all things, Jane set high standards. Jane worked very hard to get into Parliament and just as hard to get into the ministry, and she loved it. She loved making the big decisions. She loved applying her smarts and her skills and her capacity for quick study to the high volume and fast pace of being a minister. She loved being in cabinet and the exchanges over big issues and big problems of the 3D chessboard that is governing. Jane impressed so many of us each time she stood strong for her values and for her beliefs. Each time that she put women and gender equality first, or championed worker health and safety or the right of the mighty trade unions to campaign and to be heard. Now, our world, the political world of the Australian Labor Party and politics in general, it's not for the faint-hearted. Jane played tough, but there was vulnerability and there was gentleness in her politics too. And she always knew how to have a good laugh about it. My relationship with Jane over the years grew. She transformed from a political mentor, a loyal comrade, to a trusted and beloved mate. Jane was someone that I could always get a straight answer from. No bull. I will so miss that honest, straight talking, because with Jane, what you saw was what you got, and that can be so rare in political life. But the truth is, Jane was so much more than a political animal. She did love politics, but it didn't define her. The things that truly defined her, well, they were much simpler. Although when I was thinking about it, I did realise that some could say Jane was a glutton for punishment. To start with, she was a one-eyed Carlton supporter, and that rarely gave her much enjoyment at all. She was a tragic to Elton John, and she recently, and I am going to tell this secret, Molly, she could recite all of the latest Taylor Swift songs, a talent which was self-taught so that she could bond with her girls as they sung on the drive to school each day. Jane loved making people happy. She was fun, she was charismatic, she could literally speak to anyone, anywhere. She was the life of the party, and people would meet her for the first time and instantly feel a connection with her. Because Jane's love for humanity, for others, was infectious. Now, Sharon did allude before to the fact that we all knew that Jane loved a champagne. But the truth is, no one was as bubbly or as sparkling as Jane, especially when she was knee-deep in storytelling. In those moments, she was incredibly engaging, but she was also sweet and sensitive to the plight and pain of others, to the injustice and the slights of public life. Jane was beautiful, inside and out, but the only beauty that really matters at the end of the day is the beauty within. Jane radiated goodness, kindness, optimism, and compassion. When I think of Jane, and I had this thought as we drove past there today, I see her as a runner doing laps of Princess Park. She loved to run. She loved the freedom of it, the chance to clear her mind, the chance to get in the zone. A true multitasker, she would return multiple phone calls while jogging. And I've got to say, at times this drove me just a little bit mad, as I wanted her to focus on the conversation at hand. Although, in fairness, she was only a little bit breathless during our phone calls. But of all things that define Jane, it was her relationships. She took her role as a mother, as a wife, as a sister, a daughter, and a friend seriously. It was her most important work, something that she had in common with a good friend, the late Fiona Richardson. Through the rough and tumble of public political life, the Jane that I saw with my own eyes, not through the newspaper headlines, the corflutes, was a woman for whom being a mother was everything. I know that her kids, her and James's kids, mattered above all else. They're beautiful, brilliant babies, Molly, Sasha and Maxie. I want to offer the three of you some comfort. beyond hugs and tears, and I think that the best way of doing that is to ask you to look around this beautiful room and see all the people that are here today. They were impressed and they loved your mother. She was held in incredibly high regard and affection by a community that recognised integrity and courage when they saw it. Your mother's integrity, courage and love will always be with the three of you. Molly, Sasha and Max, I want you all to know that we will always be here for you in any way that we possibly can. I know that you were each there supporting your mother every step of her journey, and we thank you for that. When Jane's health issues became more serious, she chose to keep it private. She wanted it that way. When word got out of Jane's passing, I was literally inundated with phone calls from people in our Labor family, both the political and the industrial wing, who Jane had encouraged, helped and touched along the way. There are times when politics can be hard and cruel, but there are other times when there's understanding, compassion and care. There's belonging and union in our shared beliefs, the struggles of everyday life. And it's clear that that's here with us today. To Jane's family, you should be, and I know that you are, incredibly proud of Jane. As the Premier of Victoria, Dan Andrews, said in his condolence motion passed just a few weeks ago in Parliament, Jane was born, raised and inspired to create change in our world, and that's exactly what she did. Jane valued opportunity and equality. She believed so strongly in lifting up those without power and speaking up for those without a voice. Graham, you and Pam raised your girls, Jane and Catherine, this way. Thank you. To my political colleagues who have lost a true friend and a mighty comrade, I celebrate the beautiful condolence motions that you recently read into Hansard. From across all sides of the House, your words were beautiful. Your speeches left me in tears. You captured the essence of Jane, her wild, crazy brave, genuine soul, hyper-intelligent, she who wore her heart on her sleeve. For those of you in this room who haven't read those tributes, I urge you to do so, but be sure to have a tissue. And to Jane, thank you for the love that you had for all of us, the love that you had for your community, your love for the Labor movement, for all humanity, and of course the eternal love that you had for Molly and for Sasha and for Max. We love you, Jane. Thank you.
I'm high on the hill, looking over the bridge to the MCG. And way up on high, the clock on the silo says 11 degrees. I remember, I'm breathing today, the month of May, all the burning leaves. I'm not hearing a sound, my feet don't even touch the ground. I remember,
I think we'd all agree she was made for the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our service today. Can I, on behalf of the Garrett family, the Victorian State Government, and everybody who loved Jane, thank you. I said I wouldn't do this. Thank you for coming along today. The Garrett family will be staying behind so that they can say thank you to as many people as they possibly can before you leave. So thank you so much for your attendance. Please, before we go, a round of applause, particularly for Molly, Sasha and Max and James. Thank you.